Coming up on today's episode of Parasport Nation, the NHL had ASL interpretation for the Winter Classic. We have Brice Christianson, the CEO of PXB, the team behind that ASL interpretation, on the show today. You won't want to miss it. Here's Parasport Nation.
Welcome to Parasport Nation with Alex Smyth and Nathan Clement.
Welcome into the show. As always, I'm your host, Alex Smyth, and I'm joined by co-host Nathan Clement. Nathan, another day, another chance to talk para sports with you. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Alex. I'm really excited for today's interview with Brice. It was a very honest, truthful conversation, and I feel like it's going to create so many amazing discussions about accessible media. So I'm really excited to get into this today.
Yeah, we're not talking about AMI today. We're talking about a different alternative forms of media becoming more accessible. This was a interview. We had a chance to record this on a previous day and bring it to you all, but it was truly fascinating getting the perspective from Brice, someone who has his own unique shared connection to the deaf and hard of hearing community, talking about why he wanted to get involved, why he wanted to start this ASL interpretation of sport broadcast. It was such a fascinating journey that he's been on. So without further ado, let's have a listen. Brice, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today.
Hey, thank you so much. It's an honor.
So first off, where did the idea or the desire to bring ASL to sport broadcasting come from? Where did the journey start for you?
I'm a CODA, so a child of deaf adults. Both my parents are deaf, and I've been very open and vulnerable about this experience. I grew up with a very controlling and angry father who happened to be deaf. And now I'm in my 40s and I can reflect on the reasons why. He just had a hard time navigating a society that didn't view him as whole and kind of took it out on me. And so one of the things that I've always wanted to do was try to understand my father and also make his experiences not be prevalent for so many deaf and hard of hearing people. Unfortunately, that's the case. And so it really came from being inspired by my father's journey and him being a big sports fan and trying to make a difference with the privilege that that was bestowed onto me.
You were honored with the Stuart Scott Inspire Award for your groundbreaking work during the 2024 Stanley Cup Finals. What was that experience like, working on and covering the Stanley Cup Finals back in 2024? And how does it feel being a trailblazer and really helping create a first path for accessible media like the ASL broadcasts that are being done?
Yeah, it's still surreal. The whole experience was surreal, but at the same time, very validating. My journey in sports started in 2017, 2018, and no one was posting anything like, hey, we're looking for an ASL interpreter, or we want more access in sports for deaf and hard of hearing fans. And working in sports is grueling. It's got its own science, language, and philosophy. And so it took me a long time, and I'm still learning the ropes. But for me, it was a validating experience, and it allowed me to reflect on that I'm on the right path. But at the same time, this has never been about me. It's always been about how can we make the world more accessible, inclusive? How can we get more representation for deaf people on screen, in sports? And there's a profound ripple effect that sports has where it influences other sectors of society. So I'm very humbled and honored. And it does allow for a little bit more, gravitas, if you will, a little bit more weight when people reach out to us or reach out to my company. With this award, it allows us to have these teams and leagues trust us.
And so obviously, like, this was something that really speaks to me personally. I have hearing loss. I wear hearing aids. I've had them since I was about 4 years old. So seeing that the partnership between your organization and the NHL coming together, it lends more credence that, okay, we are making sport more accessible for folks. How did that partnership come about?
In sports, and I'm sure in all these other different professions, it's who you know. And for me, I had to, I sort of had to get baptized by fire. I had to struggle. I had to make ends meet. I had to, I'm struggling for the word, but I really had to, sorry, I've got very rambunctious kittens right now that are driving me wild. But for this partnership, it started with the Milwaukee Bucks. The Milwaukee Bucks gave me an opportunity. I'm forever grateful to President Peter Fagan and Coach Mike Budenholzer for having me, having a complete stranger sit on the dais or stand on the dais next to Coach Bud and have him be okay with approving the team and the league to having an interpreter for the first time. We don't partner with the NHL if that experience doesn't happen. I didn't have the resume. I don't know if, and that's just how sports works. You do have to build a resume. You have to put in the work. And so the partnership started in 2021. I was connected with some folks within the NHL, and then they connected me with Paula Karuba, who again was, who spearheaded this partnership. But it started with the commissioner's address in 2022 at the Stanley Cup final in Denver. And for me, it's always about playing the long game, but I always had this sinking feeling in 2022 that this was going to be a one-time thing. And going into that event, I was like, you know what? I'm going to change my tune a little bit. I'm going to look at the long game and see if we can kind of chip away. And the aftermath of it, it went international. I could tell that the NHL was very excited about this, not just from the PR perspective, but realizing that they have an opportunity to serve an underserved market. And so from there, we've just built a relationship where I felt comfortable about talking about this ASL broadcast and more representation in sports, specifically hockey.
What does a broadcast and kind of prep look like going into, say, like the Stanley Cup finals or just recently the Winter Classic back in December?
Exhaustive preparation, and preparation's key. Preparation allows us to execute and complete the job and do a great job. It allows us also to gain trust and confidence with our partners. It allows us to grow. And so as long as we continue to execute, how we do that really is preparation. So I meet with my team, Jason Altman, who is Chief Operating Officer, who's deaf, as well as one of the co-broadcasters for the NHL and ASL. And they put in extensive prep to make sure that this is seamless and that it also reflects what hearing broadcasters do. So it's a partnership. We also work with the NHL. It's a different process for them because they're working with an ASL interpreter and producer. But really, I'm a firm believer in preparation. Really allows us to be on the right track for an effective job.
And could you talk maybe about the kind of education that would have had to go on? Like, obviously, getting those initial experiences with the NBA and then with the NHL. I'm sure there was a lot of education that had to go on with the NHL, for instance, to put on something like the Winter Classic or do some of these Stanley Cup games that, hey, this is what is needed. This is how you can present the information and have a broadcast be accessible in ASL. Like, what was that journey like, making sure that everyone was fully aware what it took to be able to do a broadcast in ASL?
It kind of goes back to my start with the Milwaukee Bucks. No one was posting this. So no one was like, hey, we should be doing ASL broadcasts. So it was just this, the camaraderie that we have within the NHL and the belief that they have with PXP and vice versa. I give a ton of credit to the NHL production team, including Matt Stelly, Ray Jacobs, Rachel Siegel, and so many others, where a lot of the production and the aesthetics of the NHL and ASL was all them. And we're ongoing. We consult ongoing. But also my experience working in sports, I can take a step back and realize what feedback can be applied, what feedback really I should just kind of keep to myself and really play the long game. But I have to give a ton of credit to the NHL. You would have had no idea that they'd be working with deaf people for the first time. It really goes back to 2021 when I connected with Paul. 2022 with the commissioner's address. We also provided a keynote with the NHL headquarters. So it really is building and scaffolding over time. But with Matt Stelly, who is executive producer. He had never worked with deaf people before, ASL interpreters. So we had a full 2 or 3 days of rehearsal leading up to the Stanley Cup final. And then I flew down to Florida to be with Commissioner Bettman, and then came back for game 2. So we put in interpreters. And so that was a nerve-wracking experience of being in Florida and hoping that everything was going to go okay with the broadcast. But again, kudos to the NHL team as well as my team. It takes a village.
We know hockey players are known for their superstitions and rituals, but do you have any game day superstitions or rituals that you have to follow?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. We had a conversation in pre-production about superstitions from the NHL staff, and Noah Blankenship, who's one of the co-broadcasters, he has to put socks on the right side first, and then he's got to put his right arm in. So I thought that was kind of fascinating. I try to be as disciplined as possible. We're human beings, and so sometimes that's a lofty goal. I have my morning routine and night routine. Especially running a company and being an entrepreneur, you really can burn the candle for 24 hours, and taking care of yourself personally affects you professionally and vice versa. So for me, a routine is key. And that really does, I'm a big advocate on mental health. I'm a big advocate on taking care of oneself so that I can be as present, and it's a selfless job. And coaching the team, being present with the NHL staff and making sure that all their needs are met, and making sure that we have a seamless process. It's selfless, but I love that coaching aspect. But it does come down to, how can I take care of myself when no one's watching? How can I take care of myself when it's not rehearsal or production? So I have my own routines, I'll say, but maybe I've got like an 80-85% success rate with the routines.
I'm curious, what's the feedback been from the community to these broadcasts?
Like you said, being a trailblazer, those words are not lost on me. I'm very mindful, and I take it with great pride and humility. Like I said, this has never been about me, even though maybe people put me on a pedestal. The accolades that I receive, those really are then morphed into more growth, more acceptance, more exposure, more awareness. That's been my focus. But working and living within the deaf community, I think historically, something that I've seen is that you see hearing people like myself, even though I'm a CODA, get all the recognition. And so I knew that when I was blazing this trail, that not everyone understood why was this guy interpreting these press conferences? Why is this guy promoting this? And I definitely, I got my fair share of flack from the deaf community, and rightfully so. I get where they're coming from, and I can take a step back on the why. I just wanted them to give me time and believe in my process, and believe that it's never been about me. It's always been about deaf representation, and sometimes I have to be that sacrificial lamb in order to have growth and acceptance. But there's a word that gets thrown around called crab theory, where if you've got a bucket and you put crabs in there, they don't work together. They all sort of wrestle to try to get out of the top. And oftentimes you see that within the deaf community, where we don't support one another. And again, it comes from systemic beliefs and barriers and oppression and trauma. And when that is your existence, which I have seen growing up, it's hard to see the forest within the trees. It's hard to see the why behind that. And I'm so grateful. Again, I hope that we can continue on this path, but I'm so grateful that overwhelmingly the deaf community has been supportive of the ASL broadcast, and NHL and ASL, and more deaf representation. I think this is something that they've been yearning for a very long time, and I'm excited to see where we can build off of this. This is definitely not a one-time thing.
It's been an absolute pleasure listening to you speak and really sharing and seeing the work that's being laid with the ASL broadcast. Is there anything that you see in the next 5-10 years, or a dream you have of what it could look like in the future?
There's often pinch me moments. And all I wanted was just access. I just felt like it was sort of ridiculous that there was no access in sports, and that when I started this with the Bucks and there was all this fanfare and articles that went viral, that's when I realized that there was weight to this, and how I can communicate with the powers that be that make decisions and show them the value and the economy value or the economic impact that the deaf and hard of hearing community brings. So we can scratch each other's backs. We both can win in this regard. There's definitely pinch me moments. Oftentimes I just always want to focus on where we're at right now and celebrate and be appreciative. Not to get too philosophical or spiritual, but like we're not granted, today, tomorrow, I'm not granted any of that. And so I'm very appreciative. There are so many people that bought into this, that supported this, that I'm grateful for. It took a village. Ideally, I'd like this process to be easier. I think the NHL has shown that the process, yes, it takes a lot of time and preparation to building it, but it does not have to be complicated. We shouldn't have to pick and choose when access should be provided. It shouldn't have to be sort of a quid pro quo sort of thing. The NHL has shown a blueprint on what is achievable, what can impact economically, also what can impact the community. So I'm forever grateful for the NHL for believing in me and for allowing this to come into fruition. So my dream 5-10 years down is that you see a picture-in-picture ASL interpreter with every interview. You see more deaf broadcasters at events on screen. You see more inclusion, not just with the deaf community, but with everyone. We are very interesting, complicated human beings, and I want to celebrate that diversity of life. So not only for the deaf and hard of hearing community, but I would love to see the world be more forgiving, more accepting, and more collaborative moving forward.
That's such a beautiful message there, Brice. I'm curious, before we let you go, you've had the opportunity to work on a few great events already in the sporting world. Is there one sporting event that you would love to provide ASL interpretation for? If it could be anyone in the world, which one would you love to do?
Sometimes it's dangerous to know how the sausage is made. So there's definitely sports and behind the scenes that sometimes I'm a huge Green Bay Packers fan. I would hate to find out that maybe there are things that go on behind the scenes where I'm like, oof, like that is something that I wish I wouldn't have known. I think in terms of me specifically, selfishly for ASL interpreting, I'm a huge March Madness fan. I love college basketball. I would love to see, that would probably, if I were to put my finger on what sort of arena or domain that I'd like to work in, it would be March Madness college basketball to some degree.
Well, that's fantastic. And Brice, there's more NHL games to come in 2025, correct? There's going to be more opportunities for people to check out ASL and NHL broadcasts this year?
Yeah, there's going to be more NHL and ASL. We'll have to wait for the press releases, so stay tuned. But this is, again, further proof that the NHL has been committed to this. Commissioner Bettman talked about this last year during the commissioner's address. He was on as a guest for the NHL and ASL Stanley Cup Final. He talked about how this was going to grow. And so with us having a successful Winter Classic in ASL, I'm excited that we've got more events within the NHL on the horizon. So stay tuned.
Absolutely. Brice, thank you so much once again.
Hey, thank you, Nathan. Thank you, Alex. It's an absolute pleasure.
And that was Brice Christianson, CEO and founder of PXP. Now, Alex, I have a question for you. That was a great and in-depth interview where he was honest, truthful. What does that mean for the deaf and hard of hearing community to have an option like that to watch NHL games?
I think, first and foremost, I have to really applaud him for that openness, that candor, right off the start, in that first question, to really allow himself to be vulnerable as he described it and share that experience, share where he's coming from, his relationship to the community and why he is doing what he's doing. To answer your question specifically, I think ASL for live sporting events is huge because there is so much that goes on in the production of, live television. And, there are other forms of accessible formats for folks who are deaf or hard of hearing. Closed captioning is one of them. It's not always the best option. It's not always the strongest. It's not always the most accurate, especially too if you're using like AI generated subtitles or closed captioning. So ASL can lend to a better option in certain circumstances. When it's something like live sports, like an NHL game, there's a lot of the subtext, the other things that are happening that you really need a person to be able to capture. And I think it is really great that these leagues are starting to build these partnerships, trying to develop a more accessible format for folks who are deaf and hard of hearing. The one challenge and the balance I find with it, it's always a bit tough because, you want to be watching the game, not necessarily having to look over to the interpreter to find out and follow what's going on. That's kind of the one thing, because it is visual, especially if you're removing sound from the equation, whereas subtitles, it could be a bit more kind of underneath the action, so you're not looking to a corner, you're just looking down and looking up. But yeah, so I think there is definitely a desire to build more. You're seeing this from the relationship. The partnership is continuing to grow. There's more games that are going to be broadcast in this alternative format this year, which is positive. But it also kind of strikes me too, as Brice talked about, that the feedback wasn't always positive, and that is something that I have come up against, I have experienced, I have witnessed when working with the deaf community. Growing up in the hard of hearing deaf community, there is a lot of kind of division. There's a lot of every person for themselves. There's never really an agreement on, hey, this is a good thing. Because, Nathan, this is a very good thing. You got the National Hockey League is offering games in ASL. That is a huge positive. But there are still people who are saying, well, you could do this better. Oh, this should just be a deaf person. This shouldn't be someone who's CODA who is doing this interpretation. So it's like, enjoy the monumental step that this has led to, and this is continuing to be huge for the community. Enjoy it. Embrace it. Yes, you can want it to get better, but enjoy where we are at now. What do you think when the more these sports leagues start to explore alternative formats, making things more accessible, like this is nothing but a good thing, right, Nathan?
Oh, this is an incredible thing. Each step and each direction we go in, where you're making broadcasts more accessible. I'm someone as an outsider of the hard of hearing community, and it's just great to see alternative options coming out there where people are able to enjoy these broadcasts, enjoy these games, and feel more and more a part of the community, a part of accessibility, as that's one thing I can't imagine, trying to watch some sports and not really being able to follow the closed captioning because it's off, because it's delayed, or there's just errors in there. And I feel each step is a step in the right direction and is really progressing it, moving forward. And I feel it's the internet. There's always in its life, there's going to always be people who are going to question where things go, but sometimes you have to push out that kind of noise and just really find that direction forward. And I kind of want to ask you, Alex, where do you see this going? Or is there any other sporting events that you hope can get on board with this and really start to broadcast for ASL viewers?
Well, I think every single sport should want to try to do this. I think that this is only going to lead to higher viewership numbers, which is at the end of the day what the broadcasters really want. I'd love to see this at the Super Bowl. I thought this was where Brice was going to go when he mentioned and started talking about the fact he was a Green Bay Packers fan. I was like, oh no, as a Bears fan, I got infinitely worried. But I thought maybe something like the Super Bowl, something just so spectacular, so awe-inspiring, so much happening, the commentary, things like that. I feel like ASL could really lend some credence to an experience like that. Bring the deaf and hard of hearing community into that kind of arena or space, soccer, football. A lot of different sports could really benefit from bringing ASL interpretation, bringing these alternative formats, because the more people that you get engaging with the sports, the more you're going to benefit from it, and the more open it is, and the more that people see, oh, this is an opportunity, this is an option, this is a feature to have ASL. it lowers the kind of the education level that has to go into explaining what ASL is, why it's being used, why are you seeing it on a sport broadcast, for instance, and it leads to a greater awareness around disability issues, disability acceptance overall. So nothing but a good thing there, Nathan. Now, you mentioned you're a bit of an outsider when it comes to the deaf and hard of hearing community, but you're not an outsider when it comes to para sport, and there was a lot of action, especially when it comes to snowboard, in the latest edition of the Parasport Update. Take it away.
Now, the PSN Update.
Wax your boards as para snowboard takes center stage for their first World Cup of 2025. With Finland playing host, expect a high-octane weekend of snowboard cross. Sticking to snowboard cross, the FIS has announced an additional World Cup in Steamboat, Colorado, before Big White in BC host the World Championships in March. And that's the PSN Update.
Nathan, I have to tell you, snowboard cross has to be my favorite winter sport. Parasport or able body, it is the most exciting winter sport that I get to tune into and I get to watch. I always get so excited whenever it's on TV or whenever I know there's a championship coming or a big race coming, because it is so unique. It's such a great combination of the skill and then also the speed of a race, but still having to do things like jumps and turns and adding all the different elements that make snowboarding so great together. What's your favorite winter sport?
Oh man, I love snowboard cross. It's definitely up there for me. Probably my favorite's para ice hockey, but I think snowboard cross is one of those just incredible sports where, as you're saying, you got the jumps, you got the speed, you got the motion, but you're also on a course with 3 other people or potentially less than that, and you're all fighting for that top 2 position, or if you're in the final, you're fighting for gold, and one mistake, one error can be the difference between first and last. And especially in Canada, we're so lucky we have Beijing 2022 champion Tyler Turner for Canada, who's going to be racing in Finland, but also is going to be that big draw when Big White hosts the event at the World Championships. We have someone like that who's a great leader, great advocate, and really showing what's possible in that sport. Would you ever try snowboard cross?
You know, I would love to try snowboard cross. The problem is, when I was growing up, I did snowboarding all the time, like when I was a teenager and stuff. But I got away from it once my vision kind of got worse and worse. I tried going back and do snowboarding when I was filming for Postcards from the Rockies with the adaptive program over in Sunshine Village. But the problem was I found my balance wasn't there, and because of how my vision was, I couldn't tell the differential between the snow anymore. So I think those days, unfortunately, are behind me, but I will forever be a fan of watching it. Nathan, just as I'm always a fan of watching you, but unfortunately today we are out of time, so we'll have to catch up next episode. Thanks for watching and listening. This is Parasport Nation.
Thanks for tuning in to Parasport Nation. Like and subscribe to the channel to follow us now.